When marriages start to come apart, sometimes it feels like there's no hope. But what if the storm that marriage is going through is actually meant to strengthen it? Our next guest has a fascinating book that suggests that. Angel H. Davis is a licensed clinical social worker and a board-certified professional Christian counselor. Her book is titled The Perfecting Storm, Experiencing God's Best Through the Trials of Marriage. Angel, we're so glad that you're here.
Thank you.
I'm so privileged to be here.
Before we get into kind of the deep well here, let's talk a little bit about you. You are from, where are you from?
Well, I live in Athens, Georgia now. I was an Army brat, so I moved all over, but landed in Georgia with a good Georgia boy.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
You met him in Georgia?
No, we met in Texas, out in college, Southwest Texas State. Whoop, whoop. It's now Texas State University. Yeah.
And then you got married.
Got married young. I was still in college, and then we moved back to his hometown, which is Athens.
So he's from Athens?
Yes.
Wow. And where'd you grow up?
All over.
Oh, you said you were an Army kid.
All over.
So when you got married and came back to Georgia, you continued your studies?
I did. Went to graduate school at the University of Georgia, got my graduate degree, and just started working there, and been in counseling for almost 30 years now. Yeah.
Well, that's a long time.
Thank you, Don.
It's a long time. I can only imagine. See, because I'm not a counselor. You have to have a gift from God. Amanda, you don't just pop up and say, let me be a counselor.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. How was your childhood?
Like, definitely a call. Well, my childhood, I was great. I had no major trauma growing up, and I thought I was going into counseling because I had such a great family, which is true, but it wasn't until I got going into counseling that I realized, oh, we have some dysfunction also. And the neat thing is, in the Bible, there's no functional family, only the Trinity, so we're all in good company with that.
Right.
Well, I read that in your book, and let's just jump right into that.
Sure.
One of the things that your book talks about is that I was fascinated with the percentages, because you kind of took a whack at how many percentage of marriages are really kind of dysfunctional and way off, and how many are just perfect in their perspective. Would you explain that to our family at home?
Yeah, I think part of what gets us into trouble in marriages is we have this ideal of what it's going to be like, and my ideal of what my husband should be is what got us into trouble, because my vain imagination had painted a picture of what he was going to be like, how he's going to treat me. And then we get sorely disappointed and discouraged, and then try to change each other, and that becomes issues. So I think there's some abusive marriages that probably are not godly and may not change, that I think God does probably grant some divorce for that. I think there's some marriages that are made in heaven that are just easier, but I think most of us fall in that middle category. And that's one of the things I've heard most about the book is, you're telling my story. This is my story, because I think it's a very common story.
Mm-hmm. Marriage is so important to God.
Yes.
And I think, one thing you bring up in your book is the choice of either a contract or a covenant.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people enter in with that mindset,
Yes.
and they need to renew their mind,
Yes.
obviously, which you walk us through in your book. But for, the people that you counsel on that, what are some of the, biggest topics that come up when you're sitting down with someone that's basic, where someone could start?
Well, it's always about some kind of hurt or pain. Unresolved hurt or pain. And the belief is much like my belief was, even as a counselor, that my hurt and pain was being caused by the lack in our marriage or things going on in our marriage. And as God took me on a whole different journey that I didn't even know was possible at that time, I saw that a lot of the hurt and pain were the beliefs that I came into the marriage with the unresolved issues I came into the marriage with, and that happens to so many of us. And then we start expecting our spouse to be the savior, so to speak, to be the one that fixes that, and there's no way they can do it. So it's a setup from the beginning and causes a lot of trouble when there doesn't really need to be trouble.
So let me see if I can recap what you just said. I'll make sure I get it. You're saying that we come into a marriage relationship, thinking that there are certain expectations, and those expectations really are coming from our own need, our personal needs, that we bring into the relationship. And the relationship itself isn't going to be the place necessarily that those needs are met.
Right. They may or may not be. And there's also beliefs we just come into. So sometimes it's expectations of what marriage is going to be like, what my husband's going to, or spouse is going to treat me like, or it's just how you grew up. And then how they grew up is different, and that clashes, and what do you do with that? So there's so many nuances to a marriage. It definitely takes God in the middle, or we can't do it.
Well,
It amazes me
Yeah.
and how we educate ourselves on so many things, whether it's our job, but we don't always take the time to educate ourselves on marriage.
That is so
And then we
true.
turn and we wonder why so many people, marriages are failing. And it's like,
Exactly
well,
right.
we never stop to get wisdom.
Right.
So this book, to me, it lays out some very good foundational points for wisdom, and you could really use it in a small group. I like how you put the workbook at the end.
Right.
So, and you have questions that we can reflect on at the end of each segment. Very well put together. I really enjoyed the read. I'm like, woo, and I feel better, I'm learning and growing myself,
Yay.
and a lot of things you said, it's the things that we walk through day by day.
Yes.
Angel, Christian marriages are at the same percentage of divorces, or even a little tick more than the society.
Right.
Why is that? I mean, why is that the truth?
Well, the good news is I think some of the research now is saying different.
Is
So
it?
that's the good news, right? But I just think, like me, I just think I'm kind of an ordinary Christian that, like me, even though I had a lot of knowledge in psychology, I didn't have the right heart stance for marriage, what God intended for marriage. I was indoctrinated more by culture than by His Word, even though I read the Word, even though I knew the Word. And I don't think I'm that unusual. And I think until we get our minds and our hearts transformed, it's not in line with Christ. But that's the opportunity of marriage, is we become refined, we become better people. And I say in the book, I'm a more godly woman having gone through our trials in our marriage.
Well, what you say in the book that may be a little controversial in some circles is that it doesn't take two
Yes.
for marriage to have a chance.
Yes. Yes.
That's not what you hear a lot of.
It's
Explain
not,
that
in fact,
to us.
that's not what I heard, and that's why I felt kind of hopeless. I thought, okay, the only answer is divorce, but God always has another story. And if you look at stories in the Bible, it starts with one, and I use Nehemiah as an example in there. Joshua, it starts with one person courageously doing what God calls them to do, and He uses that one person to impact. And we can do that in our marriages.
So we only have a few minutes left. So if one of the marriage partners will make a change
Yeah.
in themselves,
Yes.
then that can change the marriage?
Yeah, it starts with giving God your heart. And I was talking to God about a lot of things, but I wasn't giving Him my heart to transform. And that transformation then started making an impact on the relationship. There's no guarantees. God's in charge of the end result, but there's a better chance that it's going to make it. And we're going to become more godly in the process.
And I think that's so very important, what you just said. And I know that there's some viewers and some of our partners that are watching right now, and they are listening to every word you're saying because they're in a marriage that isn't where they want to be.
Yes.
And maybe they've considered being divorced and thinking that there's no other opportunity for them.
Right.
Would you look at into our camera here, maybe
Yeah.
into this camera, and say something to that man or woman? I mean, it could be either the man or the woman,
Yes.
and encourage them
Okay.
about what to do next.
Yeah. Well, what I want to say is do not give up hope. God is the God of all hope. And until you let Him do what He wants to do in your heart, you don't know what the opportunities are in this marriage. So find a good Christian counselor or a good spiritual director, somebody that can take you into the heart of God, and let Him heal your heart first, renew your mind, and then there's a great chance that that marriage can be renewed.
Well, and I think a lot of times it's starting in prayer. You can start with a declaration.
Yes.
Today
Yes.
I will change.
Yes.
Today I want to do different. I want to be the husband that God's made me to be, or the wife that God has made me to be. And
Yes.
start that with a declaration in prayer. And I want to encourage you, if you're watching this and your heart's being pierced by what Angel's talking about, call us at Cornerstone. Call us right now, 888-665-4483, and say, I want to declare that my marriage will be